Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Simon Carver, here with Billy Galligan, author. And Billy, I want to start with a number from the National Museum of Ireland that absolutely floored me. Between 1851 and 1860, 81% of all emigrants to the United States were Irish. 81%. That is almost 1 million people in a single decade, landing in a country that was, frankly, deeply hostile to them.
Aye, Simon. 99,000 a year, roughly, just pouring off those ships. And you have to understand, they weren't exactly met with a brass band and a warm cup of tea. It was, "No Irish need apply," plastered on the shop windows. So what do you do when the front door of society is locked and bolted? You don't just sit on the curb and cry about it. You build your own house right next door. A parallel empire, if you like.
A parallel empire. I love that phrasing. Because they didn't just build homes. They built massive shadow institutions. They built the parish churches, the parochial schools, the benevolent societies. It was self-preservation on a structural scale.
It was exactly that. If the Protestant public schools wanted to force your kids to read the King James Bible, well, you build your own schoolhouse. You get the nuns in to teach. If the bank won't give a fella a loan because of his accent or his faith, you start a local saving society. It was about creating a safety net where none existed. Sure, why not? If they won't let you join their club, you build a bigger one.
And that bigger club eventually became the ultimate political weapon, the ward system. They took the absolute basic unit of urban life, the neighbourhood block, and turned it into Tammany Hall. It wasn't about grand political theory. It was a transactional machine.
Oh, completely transactional, Simon. It was beautiful in its simplicity. The ward boss wasn't lecturing you on macroeconomic policy. He was the fellow who knew your name, knew your husband was out of work, and showed up with a bucket of coal in January when the draft was coming through the floorboards. He got your lad a job sweeping the streets, and in return, when Tuesday came around, you and every cousin you had voted exactly how he told you to. It was trading votes for dignity.
Trading votes for coal and jobs. It was brilliant because it weaponised the one thing the Anglo-Saxon establishment couldn't strip away from them, their sheer numbers.
Exactly. They had the votes. The establishment had the money and the pedigree, but the Irish had the boots on the ground. It was local organising at its most brutal and most effective.
And that climb up the political ladder eventually leads to November 8, 1960. John F. Kennedy wins the presidency. It's treated as this magnificent, symbolic coronation, the moment the Irish Catholic finally, truly breached the walls of the WASP establishment.
Aye, the golden boy from Hyannisport. My own mother probably had his picture on the wall next to the Pope, God rest her. But you have to look under the bonnet of that victory, Simon. Kennedy wasn't some street-level ward boss who fought his way up from the docks. He was Harvard-educated, filthy rich, and had that polished New England accent. To get into that high castle, the Irish had to look and sound a lot like the people who kept them out in the first place.
That's the fascinating paradox of it. To win the ultimate prize, did they have to leave their actual identity at the door? The early Irish-American identity was radical, working class, deeply sceptical of power. But by 1960, to get Kennedy elected, they had to project suburban, middle-class respectability.
They did. They swapped the dock worker's cap for the gray flannel suit, and when you move out to the suburbs, to places like Long Island or the outer rings of Chicago, you're not living block by block anymore. You lose that tight, defensive solidarity of the tenement. The radical edge gets sanded down. You become part of the very middle-class mainstream that your grandparents were fighting against.
It's the classic immigrant bargain, isn't it? You struggle so your children don't have to suffer, but the moment they don't suffer, they forget why the struggle happened in the first place.
That's the heavy truth of it. You buy safety, but the currency you pay with is a bit of your own soul. You become respectable, but you lose that fierce, protective hunger that got you across the water.
Which brings us to the modern reality. Today, according to the US Census, 43 million Americans identify their national background as Irish. That is a staggering number. Nearly 9 times the actual population of Ireland itself. But it creates this massive tension between real historical memory and what some people call the Plastic Paddy phenomenon. The green beer, the shamrock tattoos, the commercialised nostalgia.
Ah, the green beer. It makes my teeth itch, Simon. It really does. You get these fellas in Boston or Savannah wearing plastic leprechaun hats, singing rebel songs they don't understand the words to, claiming they're Irish to the bone. But if you ask them about the actual history, about the land war, or the famine evictions, or even what's happening in Dublin today, they haven't a clue. It's a caricature. It's heritage reduced to a theme park.
But let me play devil's advocate here, Billy. Is that fair? For a lot of those 43 million, that green thread, however diluted, is their only connection to a history of trauma and survival. If they don't have the language or the direct memory, isn't a parade or a St. Patrick's Day celebration at least a way of saying we survived and we still remember where we came from?
Maybe, but there's a difference between remembering and just performing. When you turn a complex, painful history of migration and struggle into a yearly excuse to get blind drunk on cheap lager, you're not honoring your ancestors, you're cheapening them.
So how do you keep that green thread alive in modern America without it turning into a caricature? You've lived this transition yourself, moving from Dublin to Georgia. How do you hold on to the authentic history when you're thousands of miles away?
You do it by keeping the values, not just the symbols. You don't need a plastic shamrock to remember what it means to look out for your neighbor. You remember the ward bosses who brought the coal. You remember the community that built the schools. You keep that stubborn, protective spirit alive by how you treat the next wave of immigrants landing on these shores today. Because if we forget that we were once the ones in the coffin ships, then we've truly lost the connection, no matter how many parades we march in.
That's the real test, isn't it? Whether a diaspora uses its success to pull others up or just to pull the ladder up behind them. Thank you, Billy, and thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time.
Good man, Simon. Slán ab Haile, everyone. Take care of yourselves.